If your hamstrings always feel tight, strengthening them might help. And this is one of my favorite ways to strengthen the hamstrings that I actually never see taught. So in this video, I'm going to dive in and just show you what the movement is, but then I'll explain the cool biomechanics behind the movement and why it's so good for targeting the hamstrings. After that, we'll break it down a little bit more and I'll give you some extra tips for how to perform the movement super effectively. So first off, here is what this hamstring strengthening move is. It's so great we can do it right in a yoga setting. So one foot goes on a blanket, then we slide the foot back as we bend into this front knee and we hinge our torso forward. So I'm kind of like in a high lunge with a forward hinge. And then to come back up, it's like I pull back with this front foot, pull back in order to pull the back foot forward. So again, we slide back, and as I slide back, my hamstrings on this leg are working. They're working eccentrically as I slide back. And then to come forward, they work concentrically to pull that back foot forward. So that's what the movement looks like. And here is why it is super cool for the hamstrings biomechanically. So the hamstrings, they're a group of three muscles on the back of our thigh, and they're what's known as biarticular muscles. They cross two joints. They cross the hip and they cross the knee. So in order to target the hamstrings and really get them to work and to strengthen them, the hamstrings have to be bending the knee or extending the hip against resistance. And that's exactly what happens in this movement. So if you compare this slide here to something we already do very regularly in yoga, which is good old high lunge. So let's just think about the comparison here. Here's like a regular old high lunge. Looks from the outside, like position-wise, kind of similar to this slide. But in terms of the forces involved in the biomechanics, it's not the same. And it's not at all as effective of a hamstring targeter. So when we're in high lunge here, this is not so much targeting the hamstrings. It's much more the quads, the anterior thigh muscles. It's the quads and more the glutes as opposed to the hamstrings. So if you think about the forces involved here, gravity is the main resistance we're working against, and gravity is a downward force. So if I'm in my high lunge, gravity is trying to like pull me down, bring me down this way. So in order to resist that, I have to use my quads to lift me back up because the quadriceps extend the knee, and with the foot planted, they would lift up like this. So it's the quads, which are the opposite muscles from the hamstrings. So if the quads are really working to straighten the knee, then the hamstrings are not really working to bend the knee, right? So it's the quads and it's more the glutes that are working to extend the hip, and it's not really directly effectively targeting the hamstrings. So this is regular old high lunge. We do it all the time in yoga. I love it, but it's not really an effective hamstring targeter. And again, think of that downward force of gravity. But let's compare that now to the cool sliding back move, and we can see the forces involved here are different and the direction that they're applied is different. So in high lunge, in regular old high lunge, we were mostly working against the downward force of gravity. But here we have a little more of this forward, backward force that we're working against. So as I slide back, I hinge forward and I'm already loading these hamstrings. They're working, but then it's especially on the pull forward. So the friction between the blanket and the floor, that creates this resistance. And I have to work against that resistance as I pull back on this front leg to pull the back leg forward. So that's more of this force being applied in a forward backward manner, like more in this plane, and not, I mean, we still have gravity, but we have much more of the forward back force as I try to drag the foot forward. And that friction, that resistance between the blanket and the floor makes it so that these muscles have to work a lot. So both at the hip and at the knee, they both have to work if I am going from here and then I'm pulling forward. So then it's this knee is trying to bend and the hip is trying to extend. So that, especially that combo of knee flexion and hip extension against resistance at the same time It's such a great way to light the hamstrings up. Now let's just talk about a few extra tips so that we can actually perform this movement super effectively and really strengthen those hamstrings. So the first tip is just to make sure, and I said this already, but just make sure that as you slide back, we do hinge forward with the torso. So it's not so much like a slide back and then we stay upright. I mean, this still will work the hamstrings a bit, but it'll be more effective if we hinge forward because this will put them more on a stretch. And when we ask the hamstrings to work through a greater range of motion in more of a stretched position, that is more potent for strength gains. So it's extra effective if we make sure to hinge forward with the torso as we come forward. And then another tip that makes this extra effective is when we slide back, just do your best to keep your knee directly above the ankle rather than letting the knee track forward. So not so much this. When we do this, the quadriceps are loaded a little bit more and it's a little less the hamstrings on the posterior side. So instead of letting the knee track forward, think of pulling back through the hip so that we try to keep that knee pretty much just right over the ankle. And then, and then we pull forward. So it's like I'm trying to drag the foot back. So the knee relative to the ankle position can be helpful for really putting the loads on the hamstrings. And then a couple other tips that I really like are to make sure that we don't use momentum. So it could be easy to slide back and then just kind of bounce forward using more speed and more momentum to bring ourselves forward, but that will bypass the actual muscular work that we're looking for in the hamstrings. So just think of moving it, and especially it's on the pull forward where it's a little more potent. Think of moving with control. We're not going to bounce out of that back position, but instead push down and pull back with this front foot to draw up, and we actually use muscular control that way. And then another really good technique tip for this one is to minimize the temptation to use your back leg in the movement. We really want to try to focus the work on the front leg. So it could be easy, again, tempting as we slide back to think of pulling forward with this back leg. So like this from the back leg forward, doing like helping a lot in the movement. Now that may help a little bit, like the back leg is probably going to contribute a bit, but we can consciously kind of decide, where our efforts are and which leg is working more. And we want to think of minimizing a pull forward by the back leg. So it's less this energy and it's more this leg pulling back to draw that back leg forward. If instead we let this back leg work significantly, then we're getting hip flexor work on the back leg to help out. That's not bad. It's always good to load the hip flexors. But in this context, we're talking specifically about loading the hamstrings. So we want to minimize back leg work and maximize the work in the front leg. Now, if we wanted to reduce the challenge of this movement and make it easier, one great way to do that is just to reduce the range of motion. So the further back we reach back with the leg, the harder this will be, the more challenging it will be. It puts us more in a lengthened position for the hamstrings, makes it harder. So that is harder than just sliding back a bit and then pulling forward. So just shorten the range of motion if we want to back off and make this less challenging. Just don't slide back as far. And even just doing that shorter range that I just did, if you truly think of pulling back with that standing leg to pull the back leg forward, you're totally going to feel it in the hamstrings, even if it's a shorter range. And then if we wanted to increase and make this movement more challenging, of course, we could increase the range of motion. And that would be my first tip, is just to try to go further. But if that becomes like super controlled and no big deal and you're not feeling a challenge, and the idea when we're really trying to strengthen muscles is we would want to repeat this movement for like several reps in a row. You would do many slide backs in a row until you get to or close to momentary muscular fatigue for the hamstrings. And then that would be like one set. And then you'd want to do at least like a couple sets, 2, maybe 3, something like that. So body weight alone is already a lot, and especially to untrained hamstrings, that could be plenty. But if you have super strong hamstrings and doing this movement, even all the way back and doing a bunch, is just not really getting you there, then one way to add more challenge would be to bring in external load or weight. So you could hold like a dumbbell, you could do one, or you could do two, one in each hand. If you're only going to do one, I would probably hold the dumbbell in the side of the non-working leg, so the leg that's going to slide. And then you would just hold your dumbbell and then slide back, same idea, let the torso hinge forward and then pull forward. And this would add some more load. It would make it more challenging, a little more up on the hip extension side, but it would be a great way to make the movement more challenging. So this is one of my favorite ways to strengthen the hamstrings. We can do it right in yoga. I never see this taught. And it's especially good for hamstring flexibility because we are moving the hamstrings through a range of motion. They actually lengthen as we hinge forward and reach back. So they're being strengthened as they lengthen. We know from tons of research that strengthening muscles through full ranges of motion and getting into that lengthened position is super effective, extra effective for strength gains. If you appreciated this content, subscribe to my channel so you can stay up to date on all of the tips that I share.